so happy we alive. We together can survive.
Good evening. I'm Patrick Moore, and welcome to Louisville Late Night. This evening, we're continuing our Earth Day Keith Schneider Circle of Blue celebration and talking with Keith about what's going on here on Earth and all the changes with governments, ecology, everything. And Keith, where would you like to tell us? We were talking about Circle of Blue in general and how do people get in touch with you at Circle of Blue?
Right.
CircleBlue.org.
CircleBlue.org.
And then briefly, just for those that didn't see the first interview, Circle of Blue is involved with water.
Circle of Blue is a nonprofit multimedia news organization based in Traverse City, Michigan. It is completely an artifact of the 21st century. It's all online. We rarely publish on paper. We have a global network of journalists, photographers, diplomatic organizations, scientists, university that work with us when we're in country. And we report on the confrontation between rising demand for energy, rising demand for food in the era of freshwater scarcity. So what is the confrontation between water supply and the rising demand for resources globally in the era of climate change? And what we find are what we call choke points, the actual leverage points where nations have to face significant choices about how they respond to very dramatic ecological change. California drought, 4 years drought, worst ecological emergency in the United States since the Dust Bowl. How is California responding to that? In our view, that's a big test of modern democracy's capacity to manage an ecological emergency, and it's going to take public investment, public cooperation, right? Really good government management, some collaboration between sides that haven't collaborated before, like the environmentalists and the big farmers who have been at odds for years and years, like industry and local government, right? Republicans and Democrats, in order to get past that. And what we're finding is that all of those ideological strictures kind of begin to evaporate and dissolve in the face of emergency. And it's not just in the United States, but it's globally, and that's what we find.
Yeah, that reminds me, like, wasn't there something over in the Middle East where with water issues, I think both in the Nile and around Israel or something?
Well, Jordan and Palestine and Israel share the Jordan River Valley. Fresh water from the Jordan River Valley plus groundwater resources, and they have to cooperate in order for there to be sufficient water supply for those three nations. And at the political level all over the world, we find agitation commanding how people respond in elections. But at the transactional level, where you have to actually deal with problems, we find a lot of cooperation. And so Palestine, Jordan, and Israel have quietly written water compacts, water agreements about how to share groundwater and surface water in that region, where they kept it secret.
Really?
Reason being that they didn't want it to become public, so that it would get shifted into the agitation realm, and they couldn't get it done. So they kept it secret, and then when it was finally finished, they kind of released the data. And just this month, last month, Israel and Jordan agreed to a plan to desalinate water from the Red Sea and ship it into a desalination plant, take it, desalinate it, and ship the wastewater into the Jordan Valley to replenish water in the Dead Sea, which is rapidly declining, to put more fresh water into that system. Palestine, for the moment, was left out of that agreement, but you had agreement between Israel and Jordan to do it. We're finding all kinds of agreements like that all over the world. The idea, in our view, our reporting shows that the idea that water is going to be the next reason that we have wars is nonsense. I think that's nonsense. We think that's nonsense. Why?
Really?
Yeah, why? Because wars are expensive.
Well, we've been in war constantly for quite a while.
But having a water war would be, A, the consequences to the loser is big, and B, how do you enforce it? I mean, if it's over a river system that shares boundaries, how much army do you need to enforce it? Very expensive. And C, it's much easier to collaborate, cooperate, and reach agreement on water sharing than it is to fight over it. I mean, it's just an economics thing. It's just easier to manage, as Israel, Palestine, and Jordan are showing you, and there are other agreements like that all over there. I mean, we manage water to, Colorado River, which Mexico shares, the Rio Grande, the Great Lakes.
But when it comes to climate, people talking about the climate, the thing that sticks in most people's minds, or a lot of people, is like that we've already passed the no turning back point, that it's inevitable now, global warming, and that the seas are going to rise, New York, and that everything that's happening is like fiddlers on the Titanic or something, where we're pretending we're going to move forward without making changes that are really tremendous, huge global changes. What do you all say to that?
I don't know.
I don't mean to be so negative.
I don't know. Forgive me for saying.
But so you don't feel like we've reached a point of no return?
No. I think there's a lot of flexibility in the system and how we respond. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have responses, and we're not going to have some significant problems. I mean, significant loss. I mean, we drowned New York. Right? I mean, we drowned New Orleans. We've drowned 2 cities because of climate change in the United States alone. I mean, we're getting hammered by climate change. There are more people being killed by tornadoes in the middle part of the country than ever before. I mean, I think one casualty will be, I hope one casualty of this change will be the party, the political party that views, climate change as authentic will change its view. I mean, I think that could happen this next election.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I mean, that would be a nice casualty of climate change, where, people actually take a reasonable, rational, scientific view of what's happening.
Well, what would happen in that scenario?
I think we'd be able to move much quicker to installing a more energy efficient transportation system, much more energy efficient, less polluting transportation system. I think we'd change our agriculture practices pretty significantly and how much water we're using, and what we're requiring of our farmers, and where we're growing food and not. I mean, I think it would change our energy production systems, right? I think it would make all of our units much more efficient. I think it would improve the decentralization, expand the decentralization of our electrical grid, so that all of it isn't coming from these mega energy plants, but it's actually being generated house by house or business by business, and we install an energy internet to be able to manage it, just like we have a communications internet. And that's all very possible, where people could generate their own electricity for a modest fee off their very own houses, put it into the grid, generate revenue from it, and not have to rely on coal, gas, fossil fuels to generate electricity. I think in this century, we are going to see such substantive changes in how we do business and how we run our country. As significant as the internet revolution has been over the last 20 years, remember, the internet's only 21 years old. It started with dial-up service in 1994, and it's changed the economic distribution systems in the United States. It's utterly changed them. It's going to change how we market our goods. It's going to change how we shop. I mean, it is doing all that. It's going to change our employment. I think in this century we're going to see such changes in the United States, which has the wealth, the technical capacity, the education, the drive, the recognition to do. I think we're in this period of fear, which is driving this crazy, non-effective, put your head in the sand politic, where elections, I mean, the last national election was decided by the big issue was how many Republicans were going to be in the Senate. I mean, that was the issue. And all this that's happening in the world, that was the issue. I think that era this is going to change that era, because people are going to go, wait a second, we need to deal with this. We're getting hammered. Let's deal with this. And in California, you see right now transitions that nobody, a couple of years ago thought were happening. Like, the era of cheap water is ending in California as people begin to invest in desalination plants or systems in their houses that make water much more efficient, or they're not going to water their land, or they're not going to fill their pools, which now costs thousands of dollars because the water in the pool is worth thousands of dollars now, or they may take their pools out. I mean, these are small things, but it's an indicator of kind of the changes that are being forced by a ecological systems, Mother Earth, that doesn't care. Earth doesn't care. I mean, yeah, okay, keep using your pool, but your neighbor's going to worry about that, and then having a pool could become a taboo, a social taboo in California.
Well, California's a breadbasket.
Yeah, it's a vegetable basket.
And are they going to have enough water to keep the agriculture?
I mean, 80% of the water used in California comes from agriculture. And still, quite a lot of that agriculture the water used is flood irrigation, which means flood irrigation is there's a canal that wide, that deep, carries water, and they open up the gates and they flood the fields. Well, it's the most inefficient way, water wasting, inefficient way to irrigate agriculture. Okay.
I didn't know anything about that.
Oh, it's flood irrigation. Well, about half of the water used, irrigation water used, is flood irrigation, which is completely inefficient. Right. So in Australia, I was in Australia in 2008. They had a huge drought there, 12 years, very deep drought. It crippled their rice industry, the largest rice industry in the southern hemisphere. And they have totally rebuilt their irrigation system in the Murray-Darling Basin, which is their major agricultural area. It's bigger than California. Produces a third of their product, of their farm product. And it was, very, very Californian in its design. Why? Because it was designed by Californians at the turn of the 20th century. The Australians asked the engineers who began to install the irrigation system in California to come over and do it in the Murray-Darling. And they did a nice job for an era of water, moisture-rich era. Same as California. Well, historically, that part of Australia, like most of Australia, has huge droughts, and they got in one. And they had to totally redo their irrigation system, so they don't flood irrigate in the Murray-Darling Basin.
Oh, wow.
They rebuilt these systems. They hardened the canals. They put digitally controlled gates to control the water that can be monitored and managed from a like an air traffic control type control center. They significantly reduced how much water they would need. They increased their profits. They increased their productivity, and they used a lot less water. So the same thing's going to happen in California. The fact that they haven't had to do it it makes no, it doesn't mean anything today, because they're going to have to do it. Why? Because there's pressure from other users. I mean, agriculture can't stand in California saying we use 80% of the water, and by the way, you in Chula Vista, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, wherever, Modesto, you're on your own. Just the American way, the American virtue, American culture, the way we don't accept that. We're going to say, well, you have a part in this now, you got to play it. And it's going to be very interesting, really interesting to see how those very conservative Tea Party loving anti-government folks who've been supporting, don't do anything, don't make us pay anything, don't pay more, are going to then turn to the government and say, okay, now help us. Right? That's what's going to happen. So they have to overcome that resistance. So all of these conventions of how we manage ourselves in the United States politically, the earth doesn't care. They're going to have to shift, change, resolve. The fact that the United States government is incapable of doing anything complicated now. I mean, think about it. I mean, if we had to send a man to the moon today, it wouldn't happen. We wouldn't afford it. We don't have the technical capacity to do it. The risks are too high. If we had to build an interstate highway system today, we couldn't do it. Right? Don't want to spend the money. The green communities say, don't put that highway there, don't put it there, right?
Yeah.
The urban communities say, don't put those highways in downtown, which they never should have done anyway. They're rebuilding all those downtowns that have been shattered by those highways. So the 20th century is over. And how we respond, and we're just seeing all of these new things happening, sprouting around the country that are, I think, so promising.
Well, like I said earlier, I have very little understanding of governmental systems and politics, but Jack Abramoff said on 60 Minutes or something that the problem with our government is that there is no incentive for having any long-term thinking or any long-term policy, like an energy policy or a water policy. And he said the reason that it's not in our government's interest to have these long-term vision and planning, like China does, for example, with some basic human needs, is because of the nature of our government being lobbyists. There's lobbyists on both sides of every issue, and these lobbyists are going to keep anything from happening. And then secondly, Abramoff said our system does not work because of the revolving door between lobbyists and politicians. Does this, sir, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an astute analysis of what's happening now, but you have to remember that from 1965 to 1980, the United States of America put into place enormously important policies that were long-term and benefited us. Civil rights policies, women's rights policies, health policies, environmental policy. We built the best environmental regulatory economic improvement system in the world. The environmental regulatory program in the United States is an economic development strategy. The greener you got, the more rich you got. Our economy is 4 times larger than it was, and we put in place clean water, clean air, endangered species, toxic waste law, farmland conservation. I mean, on and on and on. We built the best regulatory system in the country, and it made the country greener, cleaner, and richer.
And that regulatory system is still strong?
Still strong. The problem with that regulatory system is that we've gotten into a place in which we're not adjusting the system for new conditions. So we are now facing old pollution problems such as nutrient pollution in Lake Erie, which produces algae, which breaks down, that makes poison algae, which gets into the water intakes of cities like Toledo and causes cities to have to close their drinking water supplies. And that's something we solved over 40 years ago, and it's back because of we changed our farm practices, and we've developed a regulatory approach which says, well, don't deal with new conditions. It's too expensive, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not going to adjust to new conditions until Mother Earth forces us to.
Until we absolutely have to.
Until Mother Earth forces us to. So Mother Earth is forcing us to in Lake Erie, because people aren't going to sit back while their municipal water supplies are poisoned, which threatens their health, but most importantly threatens the economic health and the property values of people that live there. People won't stay in communities in which they can't get clean water. It's just the same as people won't stay in communities where they don't have good school systems or where they feel unsafe. This is a basic life value, right? Basic value of civilized society in those places. And if you insult that basic value, you put at risk your entire economic apparatus of your community. And so it's changing. So what's happening in Ohio? Republican governor, Republican-dominated legislature, right? No new taxes, no new spending, just passed a law. No new government, don't do anything. Just passed a law that says we're going to manage this system better, and we're going to spend some money at it to make sure that those algae blooms don't become a problem. That's what happens. It wasn't anything else than Mother Nature saying, well, I raised the water temperatures, man has changed their production, farm production, there's more nutrients in, the water chemistry is such that I have more algae, I'm poisoning your water systems, now do something. If you do nothing, it gets worse. So what are you going to do about it? And all of that fanatical, ideology which governs how Ohio is managed went out the window. And we're going to deal with this. And people support it. And they'll pay whatever the incremental cost is. Because that's what it's going to take. If we insist on operating this high energy, high resource, high cost way of life that we have. It, convenience, right? It ain't too tough to get around, right? To live this life, it's pretty comfortable. The American way of life is pretty comfortable, but it also has an expense side to it. You can't live this life and say, okay, we do love cars, we do like to get around, but we're going to do nothing to repair and manage and maintain our urban and rural road infrastructure. We're just going to let it go. Okay, great. Until the potholes bust your car and make it a personal expense. So I just think that this politic, we're not going to do nothing, as long, if people recognize what's happening, we have to adjust how we manage these things. Until that happens, it'll continue, this politic. It'll continue because, as the original point, yeah, there's a lot of money in the system. A lot of money. And and we talked about this earlier, if the last national election, 32% of eligible American voters voted, which means that winners and losers can be decided by 16%, which is 50% of 32, 16% of eligible voters plus one. Brilliant strategy. And you can manage that 16% eligible voters going to the polls for, I don't know what they're going to spend on elections, whatever it is, 10, 12 billion bucks a year. I don't know whatever that number is, maybe it's $100 billion. But in terms of the revenue that you gain from holding off the future, right? Mm-hmm. In oil, coal, natural gas revenue, utility revenues, railroad transport revenues, all of the ancillary industries that rely on keeping the world and the nation fixed in its place. That's trillions. Trillions. So $100 billion is 10% of a trillion. $100 billion is 5% of 200 trillion. So pennies on the dollars of revenues to hold the political system as is by demoralizing enough people to say, throw up their hands and say, I'm not going to vote. I don't really understand it. It's too complex. Let them do what they're going to do. We'll survive. For pennies. And actually it's micro pennies on the revenue stream. For micro pennies on the revenue dollars that those industries, they can basically hold the political dynamic and then the governing structure in place. And that's what's happening in the United States. And at some point that's going to break up because they can't hold it because history, economy, and the earth is just going to just blast through it. Say, look, this is foolish. How in the 21st century in 2015 can you actually make a straight case that the Earth's climate is not changing and things are getting more perilous? You can't. Well, one reason they can is because their opponents are really miserable at being able to communicate the consequences. Really miserable. I used to say we had the stupid party and the evil party. Take your pick. Yeah. And now I'm like, we have this like crazy party and fanatical party. Let me take your pick.
Yeah.
So if you have one party that has very clear idea about what it's doing, and the other party has no idea about what it's doing.
Yeah.
The articulation of the response is so poor. And Americans are not dumb. We're not dumb. We aren't. People understand if they're told in a way that they can receive it.
One of the dynamics in people's thinking or political thinking, it seems to me, is like isolationism. America shutting our borders down, not bringing in immigrants, and just really isolationism versus an internationalism. And I'm curious how that plays out, or that dynamic, with the work you're doing with the global resources.
It's a great question, Patrick. It's a great question. It plays out enormously because these ecological changes are producing behavioral changes at the grassroots. And so we did the Circle of Blue project in 2007 on northern Mexico, in Tehuacan, Mexico, which was a major agricultural growing area, and it suffered from drought, and it inflicted tremendous pain on the grain growing economy there, so much so that farms closed. Well, a lot of those farms had young men as employees or family members. And when those farms closed, they headed to the United States. So a direct result of the pain that ecological changes and ecological conditions had in Kewakan resulted in an increase in the flow of young men in particular, but young people to the United States, to immigrate to the United States, that put pressure on our border in the south, and that's happening in Mexico. And a lot of those changes in Central America are because of the changes in the environmental conditions that exist there. It's tougher to grow agriculture, it's tougher to run business because the hydrological conditions are changed, which puts more pressure on our southern border. And that's happening all over the world. In North Africa, there's a tremendous political dynamic, confrontations, civil wars over resources there, about who has what land, and who's going to have water. It's led to terrible living conditions, and people are seeking to flee that region. And just this morning, 700 people died in a capsized boat that was seeking to immigrate from northern Africa into Italy. So there's this new boat person trend, events, just like in South China Seas, out of Southeast Asia back in the 80s. And some of that has to do with political, and some of it has to do with tribal issues, but some of it has to do with ecological issues about how difficult it is to grow food and how that's caused all these challenges. So there's going to be increased human responses to these changing ecological conditions. In the United States, this drought continues, and it begins to eat into the well-being and the sense of security that Californians have. And this is going to take some time, but if it starts to wring the sense of security and well-being that Californians have, they'll leave. And it could change agricultural practices and where we grow food. I mean, move the vegetable sector to Iowa. I don't know, but people will adjust. I mean, look at the Dust Bowl. Look how many people left the Great Plains at the Dust Bowl. I don't even think even today that the Great Plains in its from Canada through to Texas, right? The Panhandle in Texas. I'm not even sure that region still has recovered its population. If it has, it's recovered it in the last decade. I took a look at that in the 80s, and the population of the Great Plains was significantly lower than it was prior to the Dust Bowl.
Oh, okay.
This was in the 80s, but you've had oil development now, and you've got development of some of the major cities, Boise, Denver.
I mean, do you see an international coalition, developing for, I guess, both to protect all the nations, but also the people that are left out?
We've had episodically since the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1962, which was the first global ecological emergency, the radioactive fallout from exploding nuclear bombs in the open air. And we were doing it big time in Nevada, and the Russians were doing it in Siberia. And scientists in the United States were saying, we got cesium and radioactive materials falling all over the world now. It's getting into people's milk. And when I was a kid, and when you were a kid, in New York, selenium was in our milk. We weren't told that, but we found that out in the 80s. And the first time that the leadership of the planet said we need to stop this was the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1962. So we have a long history in the human experience and in the global experience of gathering around global environmental threats. We did it with HFCs, the coolants in chlorofluorocarbons, which were damaging the ozone layer, right? Nations of the world have been meeting about climate change intensively for almost 20 years. This will be the 20th time, trying to forge a global climate agreement. And it's been hard to do it because the opposition fueled by the fossil fuel industry has put enough, fostered enough scientific uncertainty about what was happening and what was the cost. But I think we're going to get there this year. I think in Paris we're going to finally sign a global climate agreement about, which nations are going to decide what they're going to do. And this view is about it's going to cost us so much money and it's going to be terrible for the economy. It's all nonsense. It's nonsense. The faster we do it, the better our economies are going to be. There's many more jobs and much more industrial investment capacity and technological capacity in figuring out how to move humanity from the era of coal and fossil fuels to the next era of whatever it's going to be, than it is in keeping us, wedded to a dirty
It seems like Russia with Putin, Vladimir in charge is in lockstep with the Koch brothers and Saudi Arabia and the oil. Seems a little discouraging.
Well, there's no,
At what point? What's it going to take?
Well, it's taking it. It's not going to be some. I don't think it's going to be some. God forbid, it's some. I mean, how many more calamities do we want? I mean, do you want to? We don't want to drown two cities. Let's drown L.A., San Francisco, and Seattle too, and then see if that does anything. No, we've had enough calamity. We have enough calamity. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think. To me, that I just think it takes. Look, the change that you can believe in. Remember, the change you can believe in is no change. People don't like to change. We hate to change. We spend our entire lives, resisting change. We want to get our place on the planet secure for ourselves, our families, our communities. Right? Mm-hmm. We buy our homes. And this is not just here. We establish our homes in our place where we are secure. And we are not really that interested in change. And the magnitude of the change that we are now involved in is enormous. Enormous. And so this is going to take time. And I don't think that the earth is changing. It's changing at a pace that we've not seen before, experienced before, at least in recent memory. But I'm not of the view that it's so dire. I mean, it's dire, but I'm not a big it's all going to end kind of guy. And when it comes to environmental stresses and environmental disasters, we've hyped a whole lot more than we've gotten right. Some of them we've gotten right, but we've had a lot more. This is going to produce that consequence, and it's going to be awful here. And both the Earth and humanity and the species can adjust.
Some things we see so much on television, and it influences, our perspective. And I'm curious what the Circle of Blue. Do you all look at things like ocean acidification and coral reefs dying and so forth?
I have no experience. We haven't looked heavily at the oceans. I mean, one thing that we've been smart. One thing where we've been smart about is to focus on that which we can do, and that which we can do is to understand the relationship between energy production, food production, water supply, and climate change, and that's a big enough realm for us to gain expertise in and experience in. And we have gained that expertise and experience. And our conclusion is that, that things are changing. They're changing in mega trend changes. They're happening globally. Every country is dealing with this differently, some better than others. The potential for the U.S. to somehow break through this political hegemony, which is keeping us from progressing. If we can break through this, we have tremendous opportunity to adjust, change, move very quickly in this country to a new era in which we're diminish the amount of effects. Not everybody's going to come through it unscarred. People are going to get scarred. There's going to be scarring. We've had scarring. Go to the northern beach communities in New Jersey. They've been scarred, but they've also been rebuilt, right? And they've been rebuilt because Democrats and Republicans agreed to rebuild. Well, all those, we're not going to cooperate out the window. All those rules don't work in urgency and emergency. People expect something different. So when we finally as a nation decide that we're in a more urgent situation than we are told or than we want to believe, we will throw out, these operating rules and adopt new ones. That's my firm belief. We're seeing it in California. The old operating rules are being dissolved and a new operating system is being put into place. And I think that's I have to believe that we're smart enough as a people to do that. I don't think we have a death wish. I really don't think we have a death wish in the United States or globally. I don't think humanity has a death wish. It's been really interesting to watch Japan's response to mega energy development.
Well, what's
in response to the tsunami that crippled the nuclear industry, right? Ruined Fukushima. Took out a very large nuclear power plant and dismantled their nuclear power generating sector, which was most of their electrical generating sector. And they haven't turned it back on. They have not turned, even though the cost of generating electricity with oil, which is what they're doing, gas, and is more expensive. Japanese are saying, all right, we're done. We're done with that. We got to find a new way. It's too expensive and too dangerous. Right? So
well, did they ever stop the leaking in the ocean?
No.
It's
no, they haven't solved that.
There's radioactive fish off.
Exactly, and that's why Japan is saying right. There you had the Earth responding, big time, with a tsunami that crippled, killed a lot of people and crippled their nuclear sector, which is a big part of the economy. And Japan's, the government wants to restart those nuclear reactors. Of course, the utility sector wants to restart those nuclear reactors, and the people are going, no, it ain't gonna happen. We got to find a new way. We're going to find a new way in Japan. So, I don't know what it takes in the United States, but it's going to happen. We're not going to. The U.S. political system is not going to permanently be encased in this amber fanaticism, this fanaticism of amber. It isn't going to happen because there's just too much going on, and there's too much pent up energy and investment and technology and will and intelligence in this country just to let anti-science fanaticism rule the roost.
Is that amber?
Yeah, that's the it's like amber. We're gonna we put that politic into amber, and we're just gonna hold it up in people's, and we're not moving from this. We're just gonna encase it in amber and keep it. As an amulet. It's an amulet of our idiocy. No. I just don't think that's gonna. My experience is that it can't hold. It can't hold, and at some point, the civic resistance to it will end. And I don't know how that's going to manifest itself, but it will manifest itself, and it's coming. It's coming. That's my fervent. It's my judgment. Is my fervent hope. For the country.
Can you share with us a story from a different country where you saw?
Well, I spent a lot of time in India.
And India is a good example because there's a huge population there. There's religion, like the Muslim religion, like the Catholic or the Christian Catholic religion promotes producing as many little children as possible, regardless of resources.
India produces a third of the global population increase annually, 25 million new mountains.
So that might be a choke. You use the word choking point.
Everything about India is a huge choke. It's not very well managed. The country's not very well managed, has a very ambitious economic development strategy to westernize its economy. It wants to mimic in the 21st century the development strategy the United States and China pursued in the 20th century. And it's doing so by trying to develop as much energy as it can. And it's not very good at doing that. And it's 80 years away from being able to develop the energy production sources that we have in the United States. For instance, in electrical generation, India last year generated in electrical production 237 gigawatts of electrical energy. We generate about 1,000. China is about 1,150. But the increase in electrical generated annual increases 10, 12 gigs a year. Well, between 234 and 1,000, just take U.S. generating, say 700 something. At 12 a year, that's, they're 70 years away, 60 years away from being able to get to that level. And they've been working it, and they're digging every ounce of coal, every gigawatt of wind, hydropower, and the Earth is fighting them on it. The Earth is pushing back hard. And one of the places that the Earth is pushing back hard is an Indian state called Meghalaya. It lies between Bangladesh and Myanmar in the northeast. And in Meghalaya, which is unregulated, total unregulated coal production, coal mining, coal consumption, coal combustion, they mine about 6 million metric tons of coal a year, which is about 1% of what India produces, in mines that are called box cut mines. Box cut. So they cut a box. They're about 100 feet, in a square, and they dig down about 70 meters, 200 meters.
It's pretty deep.
Very deep. And then they have different shafts called rat holes, which are literally holes, tunnels, in which the miners, many of whom are from Nepal, they import all these young guys, 70,000 of them, to go mine this coal by hand. No safety measures, nothing. And in order to get to the bottom of these mines, you have to walk down these. And you can read about this and type in Meghalaya, circle of blue, or Meghalaya coal, and my name, Keith Schneider. You can read all about that. And we produced a movie about this last year.
Wow.
About the rat hole mining in Meghalaya. These mines are very dangerous, and so I went to see these mines last year for the first time. In order to get to the bottom of it, you have to literally walk down, these ladders made of tree branches that are, all the way down the mine, and they're steep, and they look rickety, and you look down all the. It's just tremendously dangerous. And then if it starts to rain, they get really slippery. And so these mines regularly kill, 5, 10, 12 miners at a time from floods, from mishaps, from coal falling on them, and nothing's ever documented. And the mine owners have basically been very successful with the state officials in not having people look closely at this. And it went on for long enough. It started basically in the 80s. And finally, there was an accident in which 12 miners died. 12 young guys died because when the mines are exhausted, they just leave them. And so one of these mines had filled with monsoon rainwater, like a swimming pool. And the miners in the next mine were out there digging with a hole, and they broke through the wall of the mine, and they got into this other thing, and the water rushed in, and they couldn't get out of the way of this water, and a lot of them died. And there was no response to rescuing them. In fact, it wasn't even well known that this had occurred in Meghalaya, which is a pretty rugged rural state with its own peculiar state politics. And finally, word of this mine finally reached the state and then the central government. And while this was all happening in New Delhi, India, in its wisdom, had established an environmental court called the National Green Tribunal, because there were so many environmental cases coming
do
forward.
Other countries have that?
Two other countries have it, Australia and New Zealand. But none of them operate like India. India's National Green Tribunal, which has different judicial appellate bodies around the country, with the lead appellate body in Delhi, is a really aggressive, environmentally minded institution formed to uphold India's environmental laws, which are pretty good, but never enforced. So they determined that they were asked by the Supreme Court to get started. The Indian legislature funded them, and the National Green Tribunal got going. And in 2014, last year, the National Green Tribunal shut down the Meghalaya coal industry because of the risk to miners and the incredible water pollution. there's monsoon rains there, and mixing with all that coal dust and all, it was produced amazing acid mine drainage. So rivers were turning the colors of the rainbow there, from red to blue. So the Luca River, which we visited, it looks like Gatorade blue. That's how blue it is, because of the sulfate on the bottom, which is like tofu, was reflecting the color of the sky, and the river would literally turn, I call it Gatorade blue, and it was so acidic that it would kill the wildlife. And the people that live along these rivers, these are mother rivers, they had lived there for centuries, and their entire culture was built around living near the river and fishing the river and clean water from the river, totally disrupted by these mines. And it had run unregulated, untouched, until the National Green Tribunal, acting on a case that was brought by an environmental group and a students' union in that region, did something that had never happened in the history of the world. They shut down a regional fossil fuel industry because of safety and ecological conditions. And we were there when it happened.
Wow.
And wrote about it and brought that story to the world and made a movie of it and met a lot of the people that were involved, including Swantantar Kumar, who was the Chief Justice of the National Green Tribunal. So in November this year, I went back to see what was going on there, to follow up on what was happening with that, and asked Swantantar Kumar for an interview, and he agreed to see me off the record. I couldn't take notes, but we spoke for an hour about what his goals were for being at the National Green Tribunal, which had become was established in 2010 and really got going around 2011, has a new headquarters in New Delhi, right in the middle of the government structure. And the new Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who initially indicated that he might, monkey with their powers, decided to stay off because it's the one institution in India that's concerned about, establishing the benchmarks about environmental performance, so that this country, which is a wreck, it's an ecological wreck. Water is terrible, air is terrible, landscape's terrible, the cities are polluted, the cities are a mess. I mean, India's an ecological, mess. It's a mess. And Narendra Modi, he understands that in order for India to succeed economically, it's ecologically, and just the conditions have to improve. And so Swantar Kumar and I had a really interesting conversation. I'm sitting there with the Chief Justice of this incredibly important government institution, who had agreed to see me, who was aware of what Circle of Blue was doing, had read all our stuff about Meghalaya and what was going on there, had found it valuable, the data and who we were talking to, as part of the considerations that they were making, to decide what was happening. And it was really interesting where you have an American journalist and an Indian judicial figure, having a very candid, learned conversation, because, I knew as much about it as he knew about it, and he knew a ton about it, and learning about what his goals were. Well, while we were having, the week I was there, the Supreme Court, which has been dealing with a 30-year-long case that had been brought in the 80s to clean up pollution in the Ganges River, the Mother Ganga, the Mother River, which is amazingly polluted. I mean, it's a cesspool from damn near the beginning of it up in the Himalayas all the way to where it empties in the Bay of Bengal near Calcutta, getting worse and worse. And the Indians, the judges and the government for years have been trying to figure out how to enforce the law and get more stormwater treatment and wastewater treatment and sewage treatment, and they've been miserable about enforcing it and getting it in. Anyway, that same week the Supreme Court had decided that they were going to transfer part of that case. The case involved industrial pollution to the National Green Tribunal, to have the National Green Tribunal's justices begin to administer the law in that case. And that same week, Swantantar Kumar's panel, he's the head of one of the panels, and there are 4 or 5 of them, had issued summonses to the state officials in the states along the upper Ganges and told them, what are you guys going to do about this? And I want a report. I want an action plan, right? Well, on our desk, so we can review it within, a couple of weeks or months. So they had alerted the state officials who were going to be terribly involved in how to get the industries to treat their wastewater, which is basically untreated now, to actually install wastewater treatment facilities and water recycling and new technology, which they don't have to invent. It's all off. They can take it right off the rack, install it in their industries, and start to return the mother river to some semblance of cleanliness, just like we've done here with the Ohio River. I mean, this is not rocket science. It's been done all over the Rhine River, the Ohio River, the Hudson River, the Mississippi River. We've reached stasis in it. We can do better, but at least we've cleaned it up from where it was to what it is. And we need to do, and India understand that it needs to do that in its mother river.
Well, it's as if India has a green czar. I mean, does not the United States deserve a green czar, or the United Nations? Is there an equivalent governmental?
I think we have established since Earth Day the principle that clean water, clean air, preserve forests, preserve wetlands, preserve farmland, preserving our natural bounty is a public good, and it's an economic good. That's a principle installed in my career. That principle is installed, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whatever. And when lawmakers run against the EPA, it's meaningless. It's meaningless, because then you go ask the voters, well, which regulation would you like to change? You want to change your air regulation, make air dirtier? Oh no. You want to make the water dirt? No. You want to cut down these? Oh no. You want more farmland? Reduce farmland conservation? Oh no. So what does it mean? What does that mean? It's ideological cant. It's ideological rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything to people.
It's like obfuscation.
Right.
So, they've used Clean Air Acts and so forth.
Right. It doesn't mean anything.
It's the opposite of what.
It doesn't mean anything in the United States, because we have local ballot measures every election for land conservation, for farmland conservation, for transit development. Most of these ballot measures occur in suburbs or rural cities or rural areas. 75% of them pass. 75%. And those are not, water-loving Greenpeace membership folk. It's, people that vote GOP or conservatives. So, and it's astonishing, that, and it's consistent. People want their regions to be beautiful and clean in the United States. And state regulatory agencies and the EPA are part of the enforcement to make that so. And what wavers is who's in power at the top about whether they're going to enforce it or not. So in the last couple of years, we've had terrible pollution incidents in West Virginia, in the Canal River, which is a tributary of the Ohio River, where a surfactant, storage facility leaked this chemical into the water supply of Charleston, the major city, and where we had a coal slurry operation when Duke Power burst its containment and leaked. Well, in both cases, the federal government, the Justice Department, is prosecuting under Clean Water Act violations those violators. So that's a manifestation of a administration's view of the severity of the pollution problem, and they're necessary to enforce, which might not have occurred under other administrations. So how their laws are applied and how vigorously is very much a political decision. But we've also seen in this administration that the Massey Coal Company's executives are being prosecuted under coal mine safety rules and regulations for the Massey disaster that killed 29 miners, right, in Virginia, for rampant violations of coal mine safety. And they're being prosecuted under felonies. Well, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. So we have the enforcement structure to deal with existing conditions. What we're not doing is modifying those rules to take into account the new conditions. So we could have modified the Clean Air Act to deal with climate change. Modify the law, update the law, and the Congress was. We did that in 1990. That was close enough. The last time the Clean Air Act was modernized was in 1990. It's 25 years ago. We've got new conditions. So the Obama administration used the rulemaking process to say we're going to change how we burn coal in the United States in order to be able to deal with a pollutant, which is CO2, carbon dioxide, which was ruled a pollutant, a health-damaging pollutant, by a conservative Supreme Court. So, it wasn't some liberal court that made that decision. It was the Supreme Court that decided that CO2 was you could regulate that chemical as a health threat. And when it decided that, the EPA began to move under the Clean Air, existing the rulemaking structure, to say that we need to change how we're going to burn fossil fuels, coal.
I didn't understand that at all. Thanks for explaining that.
It wasn't, some liberal court. It was the Roberts Court that made that decision. Anthony Scalia.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was amazing. But they did so. Why? Because that's what the law said and that's what the science said, and they weren't wrapped up in the ideology of climate change. Maybe a couple of those guys have homes on the Potomac River that are going to flood. I don't know what. Yeah. But so we're capable. We're capable of changing. And in India, you have the system responded with a new court that had the courage and the political backing to take the Meghalaya coal industry, which is a $700 million a year state industry, very powerful in terms of the politics of the state, sends lawmakers to New Delhi as members of the legislature and said, you're done. And that ban on coal mining has still not been lifted. And when I went back there in November, it's a little leaky. There's still coal mine, but not like it was before. And now I'm getting ready to write a new piece about it, because now it's getting dicey, because in March or February, minor truck drivers were there are 6,000 truck drivers who have livings, to move that coal, burned down a government building. They were so frustrated with the fact that there wasn't action on this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a police officer was killed in a demonstration. 2 demonstrators have been killed in demonstrations. In an area that's kind of already has insurgencies. I mean, they're embedded in the political system there, where the insurgents there call things called buns to shut down. They call a bun and they shut down the roads. I say that the Republican shutdown of government last October, right? Remember?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I remember.
I call it the American Bund. I wrote about it. I called it which it was. It was the American Bund.
Do you see a green czar in China or other countries?
I don't think we need a green czar. I think we need to make the case to the body politic, to people, that this is valuable, that doing this increases your quality of life, increases your economic stability, improves the economy of your communities, makes life better, right? That's what I think. And I think when you build, that's what happened in the United States. We built those virtues from the ground up, starting before Earth Day. I mean, land conservation has been an epic of the United States. We were the first country in the world to have a national park. Right? Yes. Yellowstone, 1872, first national park. Of course, I was in Mongolia, and they dispute that. They say Genghis Khan established the first national parks.
Really?
They make a really pretty powerful case. There's a park outside Ulaanbaatar, which is Mongolia's capital, which is it's a fairly large park, and it keeps green the mountain range that's close to that city. And they say, see that thing was established in like 1200. They make a pretty good case. And a lot of northern Mongolia is forest land, not steppes, but forest land, and much of it is preserved under the system of law and land rights that was established in Genghis Khan. So Mongolians insist that they established the first national park. So we established a second national park in Yellowstone. But in any case, we've had an epic of land conservation and ecological virtue for a long, long time. It's in our literature, it's in our music, it's in our arts, and And thank God, we had this period in the 60s, 70s, 80s in which we put into place the regulatory system that worked. It worked. American cities are lot cleaner than they once were, right? When I grew up outside New York, you could see the air you breathe just like you can in Beijing now. Not quite as bad, but it's consistent. So I think one of the paths to human security is an ecological path. That's not the only path that we certainly have to tread. It's not the only path we have to tread, but I think it's shown itself, it's proven itself over the last nearly half a century to be a proven path to progress, to betterment, to community well-being, to human well-being. There's nothing that indicates that taking this path has a result that's detrimental, right?
Right.
Those countries that have done it are much better off because of it. It's not like we've taken down this path and we've ended up at 50 years later and things are worse in the countries that did it. They're much better. As I say again, anybody tells you that this ecological path, that making a regulatory path to make the place cleaner, better order, more ecological, put in place these virtues, these natural resource virtues, will cost your economy is nonsense. Nonsense. And absolutely, both on the prima facie evidence and on the just the logical thinking of it, it's nonsense. It's not true. Can't show it.
It's like what's best for the earth is best for humanity.
Totally. It's a biological system. You have to take care of it. It's like a puppy. The earth is like a puppy. You have to nurture it, and if you don't, it's going to bite you, and it's biting us good. Grows up and it bites you.
Well, Keith, thank you for being with us today and celebrating Earth Day, and we look forward to following up on everything. And in the meantime, we'll visit you at circleofblue.org.
Thank you, Patrick. It's
Thanks
been great.
So much, Keith.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.